Hello everybody and welcome back to Something Dark. Tonight we are on our 4th episode and I'm very happy to be back here recording again. Tonight we're going to be discussing a very well-known case. From June 1984 to August 1985, the residents of the greater Los Angeles area and the San Francisco Bay Area were terrorized by the Night Stalker. He was a serial killer, serial rapist, kidnapper, pedophile and burglar. His name was Richard Ramirez. To begin, let's go back in time and look at his early life and where he came from. Ramirez was born in El Paso, Texas on February 29, 1960. He was the youngest of 5 children. His father, Julian, was a Mexican national and former policeman who later became a laborer on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway. Julian was prone to fits of anger that often resulted in physical abuse. As a 12-year-old, Richard was strongly influenced by his older cousin, Miguel Ramirez, a decorated Green Beret combat veteran who often boasted of his gruesome exploits and abuses during the Vietnam War. He would share Polaroid photos of his victims, including Vietnamese women he had raped, and in some of the photos he posed with a severed head of a woman that he had abused. Ramirez, who had begun smoking marijuana at the age of 10, bonded with Miguel over joints and gory war stories. Miguel taught his young cousin some of his military skills, such as killing with stealth. Around this time, Ramirez began to seek escape from his father's violent temper by sleeping in a local cemetery. Ramirez was present on May 4th, 1973, when Miguel fatally shot his wife Jessie in the face with a .38 caliber revolver during a domestic argument. After the shooting, Ramirez became sullen and withdrawn from his family and peers. Later that year, he moved in with his older sister Ruth and her husband Roberto, who was known as an obsessive peeping Tom, and who would take Ramirez along on his nocturnal exploits. At this time, Ramirez also began using LSD and cultivated an interest in Satanism. Miguel was found not guilty of Jessie's murder by reason of insanity, and he was released in 1977, after 4 years of incarceration at the Texas State Mental Hospital. His influence over Ramirez would continue. While he was still in school, Ramirez took a job at a local Holiday Inn, where he used his passkey to rob sleeping patrons. His employment ended abruptly after Ramirez attempted to rape a woman in her hotel room. Luckily, her husband returned just in time. Although the husband beat Ramirez senseless at the crime scene, criminal charges were dropped when the couple, who lived out of state, declined to return to testify against him. Ramirez dropped out of Jefferson High School in the 9th grade, and at the age of 22, he moved out to California where he would settle permanently. Moving on, we're going to start to discuss the murders of the case. I just want to give a little bit of forewarning that Richard Ramirez had a lot of victims and his crimes were truly disgusting. So, just a little trigger warning before we get started. On April 10th, 1984, Ramirez murdered 9-year-old Chinese-American Mei Lung in the basement of the hotel where she was living, in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. He raped and beat the girl before stabbing her to death and hanging her body from a pipe. This, Ramirez's first known killing, was not identified as being connected to his other crimes until 2009, when his DNA was matched to a sample obtained at this crime scene. Later that year, on June 28, 1984, 79-year-old Jenny Vinca was found brutally murdered in her apartment in Glassell Park in Los Angeles. She had been stabbed repeatedly while in her bed, and her throat slashed so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. Ramirez's fingerprint was found on a mesh screen that he had removed to gain access through an open window. The following year, on March 17, 1985, Ramirez attacked 22-year-old Maria Hernandez outside her home in Rosemead, California. He shot her in the face with a .22 caliber handgun after she pulled into her garage. She survived when the bullet ricocheted off the keys she held in her hands as she lifted them up to protect herself. Inside the house, her roommate, Dale Okazaki, age 34, heard the gunshot and ducked behind a counter when she saw Ramirez enter the kitchen. When she raised her head, he shot her once in the forehead, killing her instantly. Within an hour of the Rosemead home invasion, Ramirez pulled 30-year-old Veronica Yu out of her car in Monterey Park, shot her twice with a .22 caliber handgun, and fled the scene. She was pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital. These two murders, and the attempted third, in a single day attracted extensive coverage from news media, who dubbed the attacker, described as curly-haired with bulging eyes and wide-spaced rotting teeth, the walk-in killer and the Valley intruder. Just 10 days later, on March 27, 1985, Ramirez entered a home that he had robbed a year earlier, just outside of Whittier, California. At approximately 2 a.m., he killed the sleeping Vincent Charles Zazara, age 64, with a gunshot to his head from a .22 caliber handgun. Zazara's wife, Maxine, age 44, was awakened by the gunshot, and Ramirez beat her and bound her hands while demanding to know where her valuables were. While he ransacked the room, Maxine escaped her bonds and retrieved a shotgun from under her bed, which was not loaded. The infuriated Ramirez shot her 3 times with the .22 caliber, and then fetched a large carving knife from the kitchen. He mutilated her body by stabbing her several times. He then gouged out her eyes and placed them in a jewelry box, which he left with. The autopsy determined that the mutilations were post-mortem. Vincent and Maxine's bodies were discovered by their son Peter. Ramirez left footprints from a pair of Avia sneakers in the flower beds, which police were able to photograph and cast. This was virtually the only evidence that the police had at the time. Bullets found at the scene were matched to those found at previous attacks, and the police determined that a serial killer was at large. A few months later, on May 14, 1985, Ramirez would return to Monterey Park, and he entered the home of Bill Doy, age 66, and his disabled wife Lillian, age 56. Surprising Doy in his bedroom, Ramirez shot him in the face with a .22 semi-automatic pistol, just as Doy reached for his own handgun. After beating the mortally wounded man into unconsciousness, Ramirez entered Lillian's bedroom. He bound her with handcuffs, then raped her after he had ransacked their home for valuables. Bill Doy died of his injuries while in hospital. A few weeks later, on the night of May 29, 1985, Ramirez drove a stolen car to Monrovia and stopped at the house of Mabel Bell, age 83, and her disabled sister, Florence Lang, age 81. He found a hammer in the kitchen and bludgeoned and bound Lang in her bedroom, then bound and bludgeoned Bell before using an electrical cord to shock the woman. After raping Lang, he used Bell's lipstick to draw the satanic pentagram symbol on her thigh, as well as on the walls of both of the bedrooms. The women were found 2 days later, alive but comatose. Bell later died of her injuries. The next day, Ramirez drove the same car to Burbank, and he snuck into the home of Carol Kyle, age 42. At gunpoint, he bound her and her 11-year-old son with handcuffs, and then ransacked the house. He released Carol to direct him to where the family's valuables were. He then raped her repeatedly. Ramirez also repeatedly ordered her not to look at him, telling her at one point that he would cut her eyes out. He fled the scene after retrieving the child from the closet and binding the two together again with the handcuffs. On the night of July 2nd, 1985, he drove a stolen car to Arcadia and randomly selected the house of Mary Louise Cannon, age 75, a widowed grandmother. After quietly entering Cannon's home, he found her asleep in her bedroom. He bludgeoned her into unconsciousness with a lamp, and then repeatedly stabbed her using a 10-inch butcher knife from her kitchen. She was found dead at the scene. 3 days later, on July 5th, Ramirez broke into a home in Sierra Madre and bludgeoned 16-year-old Whitney Bennett with a tire iron as she slept in her bedroom. After searching in vain for a knife in the kitchen, he attempted to strangle the girl with a telephone cord. He stated that he was startled to see electrical sparks emanate from the cord, and when his victim began to breathe, he fled the house, believing that Jesus Christ had intervened and saved her. Bennett survived the savage beating, although 478 stitches were required to close the lacerations on her scalp. 2 days later, on July 7th, Ramirez burglarized the home of Joyce Lucille Nelson, age 61, in Monterey Park. He found her asleep on her living room couch and beat her to death by using his fists and kicking her in the head. A shoe print from an Avia sneaker was left imprinted on her face. After cruising to other neighborhoods, he returned to Monterey Park and chose the home of Sophie Dickman, age 63. He assaulted and handcuffed her at gunpoint, attempted to rape her, and stole her jewelry. When she swore to him that he had taken everything of value, he told her to swear on Satan. A few weeks later, on July 20th, he purchased a machete before driving a stolen Toyota to Glendale, California. He chose the home of Layla Nading, age 66, and her husband Maxon, age 68. Horrifyingly, he burst into the sleeping couple's bedroom and hacked at them with a machete. He then killed them with 2 shots to the head from a .22 caliber handgun. He further mutilated their bodies with the machete before robbing the house of all valuables. He quickly left the scene and drove to Sun Valley. At approximately 4:15 a.m., he broke into the home of the Covanant family. He shot the sleeping Chainarong Covanant in the head with a .22 caliber handgun, killing him instantly. He then repeatedly raped and beat Somkin Covanant. He bound the couple's terrified 8-year-old son before dragging Somkin around the house to reveal the location of any valuable items, which he then stole. During his assault, he demanded that she swear to Satan that she was not hiding any money from him. On August 6, 1985, Ramirez drove to Northbridge and broke into the home of Chris and Virginia Peterson. He crept into the bedroom, startling Virginia, age 27, and shot her in the face with a .22 caliber semi-automatic handgun. He then shot Chris in the neck and attempted to flee. Chris fought back and managed to avoid being hit by 2 more gunshots from Ramirez. Unfortunately, Ramirez managed to escape. The couple survived their injuries. 2 days later, on August 8th, Ramirez drove a stolen car to Diamond Bar, California, and chose the home of Sakina Obawath, age 27, and her husband, Elias, age 31. Sometime after 2:30 a.m., he entered the house and went to the master bedroom. He instantly killed the sleeping Elias with a shot to the head from a .22 caliber handgun. He handcuffed and beat Sakina while forcing her to reveal the location of the family's jewelry, and then he brutally raped her. He repeatedly demanded that she swear on Satan that she would not scream during his assaults. When the couple's 3-year-old son entered the bedroom, Ramirez tied up the child and then continued to rape Sakina. After Ramirez left the home, Sakina untied her son and sent him to the neighbors for help. Ramirez, who had been following the media coverage of his crimes, left LA and headed to San Francisco. On August 18th, he entered the home of Peter and Barbara Pan. He shot the sleeping Peter, age 66, in the temple with a .25 caliber handgun. He then beat and sexually assaulted Barbara, age 62, before shooting her in the head and leaving her for dead. At the crime scene, Ramirez used lipstick to scrawl the pentagram and the catchphrase, "Jack the Knife," on the bedroom wall. When it was discovered that the ballistics and shoe print evidence from the LA crime scenes matched the Pan crime scene, San Francisco's mayor divulged the information in a televised press conference. This leak infuriated detectives in the case, as they knew the killer would be following the media coverage, which gave him an opportunity to destroy crucial forensic evidence. Ramirez, who had indeed been watching the press, dropped his 11.5 Avia sneakers off the side of the Golden Gate Bridge that night. He remained in the area for a few more days before heading back to LA. On August 24, he traveled 76 miles south of LA in a stolen orange Toyota to Mission Viejo. That night, he arrived at the home of James Romero Jr., who had just returned from a family vacation to Rosarito Beach in Mexico. Romero's son, 13-year-old James Romero III, happened to be awake and heard Ramirez's footsteps outside the house. Thinking there was an intruder, James went to wake his parents, and Ramirez fled the scene. James raced outside and noted the color, make, and style of the car, as well as a partial license plate number. Romero contacted the police with this information, believing that his son had chased away a thief. After this encounter, Ramirez broke into the house of Bill Carnes, age 30, and his fiancée, Inez Erickson, age 29, through a back door. Ramirez entered the sleeping couple's bedroom and awakened Carnes as he cocked his .25 caliber handgun. He shot Carnes 3 times in the head before turning his attention to Erickson. Ramirez told the terrified woman that he was the Night Stalker and forced her to swear her love to Satan as he bet her with his fists and bound her with neckties from the closet. After stealing what he could find, he dragged Erickson to another room before raping her. He then demanded cash and more jewelry and made her swear on Satan there was no more in the house. Before leaving, Ramirez told Erickson, "Tell them the Night Stalker was here." Erickson untied herself and went to a neighbor's house to get help for her severely injured fiancé. Surgeons removed 2 of the bullets from his head, and he survived his injuries. Erickson gave a detailed description of the assailant to investigators, and police obtained a cast of Ramirez's footprint from outside the Romero house. The stolen car that Ramirez was driving was found abandoned on August 28th in Wilshire Center, Los Angeles. Police were able to obtain a single fingerprint from the rearview mirror, despite Ramirez's careful efforts to wipe the car clean of his prints. The print was positively identified as belonging to Ramirez, who was described as a 25-year-old drifter from Texas, with a long rap sheet that included many arrests for traffic and illegal drug violations. Police officials decided to release a mugshot of Ramirez from a December 12, 1984 arrest for auto theft to the media. The Night Stalker finally had a face. At a press conference, police spoke directly to Ramirez. They said, "We know who you are now, and soon everyone else will. There will be no place that you can hide." On the night of June 27th, 32-year-old Patty Elaine Higgins was murdered in her Arcadia home. The crime was not discovered until July 2nd when she didn't show up for work. Her attacker sodomized her, strangled her, and slashed her throat. Ramirez was charged with her murder. However, the charges against him in this case were eventually dropped due to a lack of concrete physical evidence linking Higgins' murder to the Night Stalker crimes. On August 30th, 1985, Ramirez took a bus to Tucson, Arizona to visit his brother, unaware that he had become the lead story in virtually every major newspaper and television news program across California. After failing to meet his brother, he returned to LA early on the morning of August 31st. As he was leaving the bus terminal and heading to a convenience store, he walked past police officers who were staking at the bus terminal in hopes of catching the killer should he attempt to flee on a bus outbound from the city. After noticing a group of elderly Mexican women fearfully identifying him as El Matador, the killer, Ramirez saw his face on the front pages of the newspaper rack and fled the store in panic. After running across the Santa Ana freeway, he attempted to carjack a woman, but was chased away by bystanders who pursued him. He hopped over several fences and attempted 2 more carjackings, but he was eventually subdued by a group of residents, one of whom had struck him over the head with a metal bar in their pursuit. The group held Ramirez down and relentlessly beat him until the police arrived and took him into custody. Jury selection for the trial began on July 22, 1988. At his first court appearance, Ramirez raised a hand with a pentagram drawn on it and yelled, "Hail Satan." On August 3rd, the LA Times reported that some jail employees overheard Ramirez planning to shoot the prosecutor with a gun, which he intended to have smuggled into the courtroom. Consequently, a metal detector was installed outside, and intensive searches were conducted on people entering. On August 14th, the trial was interrupted because one of the jurors did not arrive at the courtroom. Later that day, she was found shot to death in her apartment. The jury was terrified. wondering if Ramirez had somehow directed this event from inside of his prison cell, and whether or not he could reach the other jurors. However, it was ultimately determined that Ramirez was not responsible for her death, and she was shot and killed by her boyfriend, who later committed suicide with the same weapon in a hotel. The alternate juror who replaced her was too frightened to return to her home. On September 20th, 1989, Ramirez was convicted of all charges: 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. During the penalty phase of the trial on November 7th, he was sentenced to die in California's gas chamber. He stated to reporters after his sentence, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." The trial cost $1.8 million, which equates to $3.7 million in 2019 US dollars, which at the time made it the most expensive trial in the history of California, until surpassed by the O.J. Simpson trial in 1994. By the time of the trial, Ramirez had fans who were writing him letters and paying him visits. Beginning in 1985, Doreen Leoy wrote him nearly 75 letters during his incarceration. In 1988, Ramirez proposed to her, and on October 3rd in 1996, they were married in California's San Quentin State Prison. For many years before Ramirez's death, Doreen stated that she would commit suicide when Ramirez was executed. However, Doreen eventually left Ramirez in 2009 after DNA confirmed that he had raped and murdered 9-year-old May Lung. By the time of his death in 2013, Ramirez was engaged to Christine Lee, a 23-year-old writer. On August 7, 2006, Ramirez's first round of state appeals ended unsuccessfully when the California Supreme Court upheld his convictions and death sentence. On September 7, 2006, the California Supreme Court denied his request for a rehearing. Ramirez had appeals pending until the time of his death. Psychiatrist Michael H. Stone described Ramirez as a made psychopath as opposed to a born psychopath. He said that Ramirez's schizoid personality disorder contributed to his indifference to the suffering of his victims and his untreatability. Stone also stated that Ramirez was knocked unconscious and almost died on multiple occasions before he was 6 years old, and as a result, later developed temporal lobe epilepsy, aggressivity, and hypersexuality. Ramirez died of complications secondary to B-cell lymphoma at Marin General Hospital in Green Bay, California on June 7, 2013. He had also been affected by chronic substance abuse and a chronic hepatitis C viral infection. At 53 years old, he had been on death row for more than 23 years, and by some estimates, he would have been in his early 70s before his execution was carried out due to California's lengthy appeals process. And that brings us to the end of tonight's episode. For anyone interested who wants to learn more about this case, there is actually a new documentary on Netflix called Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer, which is a 4-part series, just talking about and going more into the case. So I would recommend to look into that if you are interested in this case. So I just want to say thank you for listening to tonight's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you have any requests for upcoming For upcoming episodes, please let me know. The best way to get in contact with me is through Instagram, and I'll leave my handle in the show notes. The reason that I chose tonight's case on the Night Stalker was because last week in the case of Elisa Lam in the Cecil Hotel, it was mentioned that Richard Ramirez had actually stayed there during some of his murders and during his crime spree in the 1980s, so I thought it would be quite interesting to touch on it tonight. But that is it for tonight, so thank you for listening, and I will see you next week.